policy that I chose to focus on this semester is Juvenile Detention Centers and an end to those centers and all the violence within it by instead replacing those centers with a transitional housing that is focused on therapy, rehabilitation, and enrichment opportunities for youth. On a personal note, one of the reasons why I chose this topic for my policy focus is because I am an enrichment instructor and business owner for grades K through 12, and I have seen firsthand the importance of offering such programs for all types of kids. There are a great amount of racial, gender, and orientation disparities within juvenile detention centers. African American youth are 5 times more likely to be incarcerated than white youth. Native Americans are 3 times more likely to be incarcerated than white youth, and Latino youth are 2 times more likely to be incarcerated than white youth. Girls make up about 15% of youth in residential placement. Gender inequities falling heaviest on girls of color and those that are considered to be LGBTQIA. Girls of color are much more likely to be incarcerated than white girls. Youth prisons are harmful. While in detention centers, youth are often provided with inadequate education, health care, and counseling services. They are at a greater risk of maltreatment, physical and psychological abuse, sexual assault, and suicide. The use of solitary confinement further deprives them of social interaction, mental stimulation, and brain development. COVID-19 has only made things worse. This first one is in 2017. In Texas, a judge was sentenced to a former juvenile detention staff member to 10 years in prison for sexually assaulting 3 male inmates. At a Lakeside Academy, which is a boys' reform school in Kalamazoo, Michigan, were charged with manslaughter for improperly restraining a teen who later died from restraint. The criminal investigation is still ongoing. And now we are moving on into the state that I am focusing on, the state of Maine. This past September, the organization Disability Rights Maine sent a letter following a routine monthly visit to Long Creek Detention Center in South Portland, Maine. According to the letter, staff members on August 2nd were restrained as many as 6 residents. A staff member allegedly wrapped their arm around a young person's neck and knelt on their back for almost 10 minutes. Now we are going one step further into the primary focus of my advocacy policy, which is the shutdown of Long Creek Detention Center. Long Creek Detention Center in South Portland, Maine is Maine's last juvenile detention facility. It has place for 164 beds and serves both male and female offenders ages 11 to 21. In recent years, lawsuits against Long Creek have brought to light suicide attempts and beatings inside the development center. Long Creek is not the most appropriate place for those services to take place, such as rehabilitation and supportive services. They should instead be held within the community. Now we are moving on to the specific bill that I'm focusing on for the closing of Long Creek Detention Center, which is LD 1668. Back in June of this year, this bill was actually vetoed because it represented apparently a simplistic solution to a rather complex issue. The shutdown of Long Creek Detention Center is necessary because of violent behavior from staff onto adolescents, poor living conditions, and lack of mental health or emotional support. The prison-like environment of these juvenile detention centers holds very little positive outcome for youth. In many cases, these adolescents greatly need mental health support and are not getting this at Long Creek Detention Center. Possible solutions: alternative housing, 3 major components. Youth have the chance to rehabilitate, grow, and become functioning adults. However, these adolescents have a much higher probability of becoming a functioning member of society if they have the mental health support, rehabilitation, and enrichment options to guide them. The idea is to create a separate center that provides full mental health support and rehabilitation services, enrichment programs, and an opportunity. A proper mental health care facility and transitional housing in lieu of Long Creek Detention Center's closing could create expanded enrichment options, rehabilitation support, professional support from well-trained staff, end of staff violence, opportunities for adulthood support, i.e. jobs in the future, etc. Opportunities for advocacy. Writing a letter to Governor Janet Mills, keeping up to date with allies such as Maine Youth Justice and many more, educating yourself and others about the violent occurrences at Long Creek Detention Center and other juvenile detention centers within your state. And finally, working with others to sign on a petition for a revised LD 1668 in the state of Maine.